Welcome to the second part of the first class of the Itire Project Training Course on Refugee Education in the Early Childhood Sector. We will examine how to use the Itire self-assessment tool developed by the project to analyze the educational offer of ECC services to children and families from a refugee background. You will find the Itire self-assessment tool in the project website. What is the Itire self-assessment tool not? It is not a test, it is not a diagnostic tool, and it is not a ranking instrument. So what is it? It is a way for promoting good practices, as well as a tool for strengthening good practices for refugee education in the early childhood sector. What is the structure of the self-assessment tool? In the first part of the class, we identify a list of areas for working in refugee education in the early childhood sector. Each area encompasses several dimensions, and each dimension in turn includes several indicators. Indicators are usually in the form of questions or more rarely statements, and the literature shows that there are two possible approaches to indicators: open and closed. An example of open indicators, open question, comes from Booth and ESCO. Does the school seek to increase engagement in learning by improvements in learning activities? As you can see, this open question have some pros and cons. On the side of pros, we find dialogue. This open question can promote dialogue and conversation among those that are working on the evaluation of the services. But there are also some cons. Open questions tend to be vague or too general. On the other hand, we find closed question. And a good example is that from the European Agency of Special Educational Needs. Are established rules for adapted transport facilities in place in that school? And again, we find some pros and cons. On the side of pros, there is clarity, specificity of the question. But on the side of cons, it is that this is a yes or no style question. So there is not much room for delving into the topic or provide some reflection about the question at stake. For the self-assessment tool, we used both open and closed question, trying to take advantage of the pros of both approaches. What is a good question? A good question is a specific one. For example, a question using a rating scale, but also including question about current actions and planned intervention. This is an example from the self-assessment tool, A51. Are refugee students recognized for their distinctive abilities and potential? And evaluators are invited to fill in a Likert scale, never, rarely, often, always, but also to provide description of the current action they have been developing in school, but also description of the possible planned intervention. This, in turn, will lead to the identification or development of good practice. Who is answering these questions? A useful self-evaluation is not an individual report, but the reflective outcome of a group which includes several actors: educators, service leaders, children, as much as possible, of course, parents and carers, and stakeholders.